Hi Metas, I've done a ton of testing for KVD Boom Boom builds to not only maximize its ability to one-shot entire rooms, but also to melt bosses. It even beats Critical Pulse in terms of AoE and single target DPS, as I showed in round 1 of my build tournament series. You've asked for it, so here's the dedicated build video. Alright, so the first thing we gotta look at is the star of the build, of course, KVD Boom Boom. This weapon does an 18% chance to trigger burn on hit, but the biggest part that makes it so great is that hitting a target once triggers an explosion, dealing 300% psi intensity AoE blaze damage, with a cooldown of only 2 seconds. It deals only 40% damage to players, but in a PvE build, this damage is massive and has an enormous area of effect. This explosion will also apply 1 stack of burn to enemies hit, plus, if this all wasn't enough, 30% additional blaze damage. So much of this weapon's damage is coming from the blaze effect. For our calibration on the Boom Boom, I am using the Assault style so that you get 25% extra damage. And of course, you want to use the highest double elemental substat calibration you can find. So you might be wondering, is that weapon really that strong? And while it is a strong weapon, what really makes this burn build shine is the deviation you're going to be using, because Pyro Dino is still on its own such an incredibly strong deviation that it will knock your DPS up through the roof. When I was testing this against Critical Pulse was winning. But when I added in Pyro Dino to the burn build and Mini Feaster to the surge build, I found out that I was just doing so much more damage with the burn build. And as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the KVD Boom Boom damage is coming from Blaze, and the buff that Pyro Dino gives is specifically to Blaze. And when attacking targets affected by burn, it will cause an explosion. So this on its own, the deviation will do a massive amount of damage. But when you're pairing it with something like KVD Boom Boom that does so much of its damage through Blaze explosions every 2 seconds, you can see why this pairing really helps you up the single target DPS and make this not just an AoE weapon or a weapon that you can only use for AoE. It can do respectable single target DPS. Now, of course, something like Primal Rage still going to come out in the lead. But if you want something that you can use as an all-rounder, AoE and single target DPS, this is a perfect example. So now let's get into our key armor. For this, it's going to be the Barbecue Gloves, which does burn damage frequency increases with the number of stacks up to 100%. And this is going to really help you to increase that damage over time as you're stacking burns from both the weapon and Pyro Dino. So for the armor, I am using the Treacherous Tides set, and this is mainly because I'm on a Lunar Oracle server. And because I'm going to be constantly losing sanity and health as I'm going around in the Lunar Oracle cycles of the Red Moon, I'm going to be getting so much more damage from weapon damage and status damage from this set that is going to outperform the other options you have when you're in the Red Moon event, at least. You could probably get away with more damage on a non-Lunar Oracle server if you use the Shelterer or the Blackstone, but that's where I am. And because I'm on Lunar Oracle, I'm using 4-piece. That's gonna knock down your damage a bit because, again, you could use the 3-piece, that's where it stops giving you damage buffs, but then use 2 pieces of something else like Shelterer to get a little extra elemental damage instead of the shield. But I prefer to be able to survive more easily because, frankly, I'm lazy and sometimes I don't pay attention. So having this auto shield is huge for survivability in the Lunar Oracle scenarios. For your last piece of armor, I'm using the Renegade Shoes, again because I'm on a Lunar Oracle scenario. Constantly running around at low health, meaning that something like Bastille isn't going to give me the damage boost. So the only thing that really helps me out, or helps me out the most, I found, was having the extra reload speed. KVD Boom Boom has a really bad reload speed, and there are mods that you can use to help improve that reload speed, but because none of the other armor sets really did anything that helped me, I figured why not take the reload speed. Right, starting with the mods, I just want to point out really quickly that you're going to notice they're all level 1. That's because when I did my last video where I did damage testing, both of the builds had only level 1 mods so that it wouldn't skew one or the other based on one build having better mods. So just a note in case you haven't watched the last video. Starting with the weapon, we're going to go with Flame Resonance Burn. In the testing that I did, having that additional stack of burn, 2 stacks of burn, is going to increase your overall damage over time, and the burn duration doesn't really matter too much because especially if you're using Pyrodino, you're going to be able to keep applying burn and keep that high stack damage going. If you get the burn suffix like I did, that's great. It's going to probably be the best that you can do because you want as many multipliers, burn, elemental, status to increase your damage. And it also has burn trigger chance, only level 1, 1.2%, but that's another great stat to have on the weapon. For our secondary weapon mod, we're going to be using Vulnerability Amplifier to get that extra damage on targets with Bullseye. For your melee weapon, you've got a couple of options. So melee weapon option A is Long Axe, because doing a heavy attack will give you Fortress Warfare. Fortress Warfare on its own gives you a damage buff, and depending on the scenario you are in, you have different cradle perks that will further increase your damage while you are in Fortress Warfare. And for melee weapon option B, you've got the Kukri. Now, this can only be obtained as dropped gear, which is a bit of a hassle. However, if you do have it, it gives you a lot of buffs if you're able to manage the procs. Upon defeating a target, all weapons attacks, all weapons, plus 30%, crit rate, plus 15% lasting 10 seconds. And a big part here is if you defeat an enemy with a heavy attack, you get extra psi intensity. And that's a big deal because of the burn and blaze damage you're doing. And if you really want to make this easy on yourself, you can carry around those heavy ice cubes that the ice pot creates. You drop one of those. If you kill that with a heavy attack, that will proc all of these buffs. It's not really worth it for just running around in the wilderness or certain silos. Maybe you can do it. It's really best for when you've got a boss that you are trying to burn in as short of a period as possible, especially if you're initiating combat and you want to burn them down as fast in that opening attack as you can. If you are going with a long axe as your melee weapon, you can absolutely go for the mods that will allow Fortress Warfare to extend for a longer duration. So onto our armor mods. We're going to go with Work of Proficiency, and you want talents. Anything that gives you status and element damage is preferred. Work of Proficiency is going to be the best for a long-term damage, especially if you've got Pyrodino going to keep your burn stacks up. However, if you are going to be doing more of a burst type damage, then something like Elemental Havoc or your status Deviation Expert will work for this if you're just doing one-offs and not sustained damage. Your Mask mod is one that can have the burn specific substats. It's the only armor mod that can. So if you can get this, it's going to be excellent for increasing your damage. And burn trigger time, burn trigger chance, those are going to be also great substats to get, but the main one is that first one, your burn damage. If you cannot get the burn substat, then a talents one with elemental and status damage will work. For your chest mod, the ideal one would be Quick Comeback if you can get that with the status damage perks. That's because it will allow you to automatically fully reload your weapon if you use a healing item. However, I don't have one, so I went with whatever chest piece I had good elemental and status damage for. The best one I had was this one here with the 6.4%. Should also mention for your helmet and chest mods, if you have good lunar mods that have status or elemental damage that increases as your health gets lower, those are also going to be much better than you can generally get, as those will multiply a lot more and you will regularly be at low health. For our bottoms mod, we're going to go with Elemental Resonance. That's going to increase our elemental damage when we reload from a fully empty magazine. And as usual, you would want elemental and status damage buffs on these if you can get them. For our gloves mod, I went with Elemental Overload. Again, talents with the substats of elemental and status damage are the best here. I'm going with the elemental damage here because with all of the mods and buffs that I have, trying to balance out my elemental and status damage as much as I can. And without these mods, I tend to have a little bit more status damage than I do elemental. So that's why I go with all of these elemental damage mods. Go with whatever balances your status and elemental the best. And for our Shoots mod, if you are on a Lunar Oracle server, you really can't do better than Rush Hour. Talents specifically again, what this does is with every 10% health lost, you are going to get 4% weapon and status damage. And that's going to cap out at a maximum potential of 36% if you get down to 10% health or lower. And if you're at only half health, that's 50%. 5 times 4% is still 20% status and weapon damage. You'll pretty regularly be at 50% health or lower. So this can meet or beat mods that you could choose otherwise, and it's pretty much a no-brainer in Lunar Oracle. If you're not and you're regularly running around with high health, then probably Covered Advance would be your best bet. The ammo you're going to want to be using is the Disintegrating AP ammo for 10% more damage for burn and 15% psi intensity. For our drink buff, I went with the Stardust Raspberry Shaved Ice so that our continuous debuff effect, or burn in this case, would be increased by 20%. And for our food, I went with Mixed Fried Hot Dog because I am running a secondary bullseye weapon, so we will get 20% increased damage to targets we mark. If you haven't already watched my Critical Surge versus KVD Boom Boom build battle video, then you should check it out on screen now, and you can see how I thought it compared against Critical Pulse. So what do you think about the build? Are there choices you would have made differently? Love to hear from you guys in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching.